For this week's assignment, we are looking at different publics and how they're used in my district. So I use the website Creately in order to make this diagram, and I have the publics used by my district divided into two categories. So I first have internal and then external public. So internal is communication within the district and external is outside of the district. So first, if we look at the internal side, I have the variety of different ones listed here. And then I also have mentioned what type of communication this is: W for written, O for oral, and D for digital. And then I also have mentioned whether it is two-way or a one-way type of communication. So if we first look at the internal communication through the school board, I have that this is a two-way communication, all from written, oral, and digital formats. So communication within the school board is via face-to-face. So this would be mostly oral. When the school board itself meets, they communicate on a face-to-face method. Communicating from the school board to other internal sources via written, the minutes, and they're shared in a digital format. So school board most often is oral, and then a combination of written and digital through the minutes. And this is two-way communication because the school board is talking to itself, but then it can also allow outside members of the school board, whether that be teachers, students, or parents. They can come in and discuss things with the school board as well, making it a two-way communication. Next, on internal, we have the administration. So I kind of divided this up into different forms of administration. So I have the superintendent as well as building administration. They all three use varieties of the written, oral, and digital as well as two-way communication. So depending on the situation, different methods are used. Starting with the superintendent, most often the superintendent is going to use some sort of written or digital sort of communication, typically by email. For the superintendent in particular, they spend most of their time not in the classroom, in their office at the district office building. So most of their communication is not in an oral format, while it does happen, just more on a limited basis. And then if we look at the building administration, they're using all three, so whether it's written, oral, and digital. If we're looking at the oral communication from building administration, they are interacting with students and teachers on a daily basis, having face-to-face communication. They're also using written and digital, whether that be communication through our social media for digital communication or communication by email. If we move on to teachers, they also are using all three formats of written, oral, and digital, as well as it being two-way communication. So for the teachers, they are most often communicating orally. So if we think about teachers in the classroom, most of the time they are communicating in an oral format. When this is not feasible, digital and written are used. So just to add on to this, teachers can also use written and digital formats to supplement oral communication. So many teachers have things in a digital format for their students, and they'll add on to this using oral methods. Teacher communication is two-way, whether it be teachers communicating with students and the students then communicating back with the teachers, or students with parents, or students with administration. In order to be an effective communicator as a teacher, it's really important that you use that two-way communication. Then if we look at the support staff, my idea for the support staff is whether that is including paras, janitorial, custodial, kitchen staff, they're all included in the support staff area. So for them, they're typically using oral as their main source for daily conversation with students and other staff members. They can, in fact, also use written and digital when they're communicating outside of the school. So if, we have a para that needs to communicate with one of their students' parents, they will also use either a written or digital format to do that. But most of their time is spent face-to-face, and they'll be using oral for that. It is two-way, as I said, because they're typically either communicating with students or with other staff members, and then staff members communicating back with them, making it a two-way communication. And then lastly, if we look at the students, they are also using all three formats, digital, oral, and digital, making this two-way conversation as well. So for students, most of their communication is oral for daily interaction. So, most of their class time is spent in an oral format. However, increasingly, students are using digital for assignments and communication. I could, if I wanted to, and depending on what the school year looks like for people this year, majority of that time may be spent in a digital format where students are doing all of their communication digitally. Written is increasingly being used less for students. Some assignments, at least in my classroom, I still use written, where they're writing on physical paper or writing letters, which we still do, but this would be the least used form for students. Then if we work our way to the other side on the external publics, so these are people that are communicating outside of the school district. So the first one I have listed here, and I think the largest and most important, is our parents and our family members. So I have this as a two-way communication using oral and most often digital. So parents often communicate via email or orally at conferences. So I see this as the most two common ways that parents will communicate with staff members or vice versa. Just because they are outside of the school district, oral isn't always as convenient, except for when we have those built-in conference times, then oral is usually the preferred method. And then often we're using email to communicate back and forth with parents. Then if we move on to local businesses, I have also here that this is more of written and a digital format, less of the one-way or less of the oral, because it is people that we're not seeing as regular on a daily basis. So if we look at their communication methods, it's typically via written and digital formats. Oftentimes this can be seen as sponsors for school activities. So while local businesses are used and their values and opinions are taken into consideration, this is often more of a one-way conversation where they're there to support us and cheer for us, but less of that interaction is really happening. Then if we move on to our community members, I have also that this is using two of our methods the most often, orally and digitally. So they're communicating via written and digital formats, often as sponsors for the school activities as well. So this is similar to the local businesses, but for community members, whether this is they're attending our community events, so whether it's a sporting event, a play, Scholars Bowl, all of these community members are, responsible for helping put this on. But again, like the local businesses, I have this as a one-way communication because there's not as much engagement really happening here, but they're there more of as like a support system for our school district. And then for law enforcement, I have them using oral communication as the most preferred method, and this being a two-way type of communication. So for law enforcement in my district, we don't have any sort of officers who are stationed at our school or anything like that. But law enforcement is still used regularly, probably more than it should be. So this is communication orally, but face-to-face methods, and then phone calls when deemed necessary. So, if there are truancy issues, then the law enforcement or law side will get involved, as well as, kids skipping school and whatnot, fights, which we've had. The law enforcement will be called in for those as well. And I have this as a two-way communication method because whether it is our administration communicating with the law enforcement or law enforcement communicating with our administration about things that they see as an area of concern. So I hope this diagram made it easier to understand all of the different communication methods and who is communicating with who. I particularly enjoyed using the Creately website. I thought it was quite easy to use and looks visually appealing, and I may consider using this in the future. Thank you.